All. I hope everyone's had a chance to review the draft framework. We
We
have
have
eight
eight.
recommendations that we will need to discuss and review today. But because so much of the work is focused on street names and our charge to recommend which ones we should change. There were a number of requests to learn about what that process is. How does the city currently go about naming streets, and what is the process for renaming? So, Tiffany, would you like to introduce, is it Kathy Dennis? Is she with us?
There's a name I don't see. I don't know if Kathy's going to speak to her or if
It's Jennifer.
or Jennifer's going to speak to it. I just don't see your name listed. So oh, it's just a phone number. Sorry. Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm having
you're
issues
fine.
with my my name is Jennifer Keys with CDOT. I'm sorry I'm having problems with computer here in the government center, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I think we just wanted to, if you could just give us a brief, and I know there might be other questions, but if you could just give us a brief overview of kind of like what the current process is for changing street names, and then what the process is for that you and I were speaking about how street names are derived, or how does a street name come into existence?
Absolutely. So the first thing is a citizen would go on our website and they would submit a form for a street name change. And that comes directly to me, and it's typically neighborhoods where they just want to rename the street for various reasons. So I get the request, and the first thing I do is check to make sure there are no duplicates. I then check to see how many parcel owners will be affected, and then I submit that. They submit 3 name choices. So all 3 we check, and I submit it to our street name change committee, which is Mecklenburg County GIS, all emergency services, and our GIS team. They look at the names, they check them for sound alike, duplicates, for anything that would delay emergency services. Once that name is approved, whichever one they choose, the committee, they send that back to me. I then create a petition for the person that requested the name change. I send that out to them. They have to get 60% of all parcel owners, no renters, to sign that petition. They send that back to me once they sign. And then we go ahead with creating work orders and notifying all. There's about 1,000 people on my street name change list that we notify. We notify all emergency services, U.S. Post Office, wayfinding, like Google and Waze and things like that. And then the last step is to install the street name markers. That's for our area with renaming only.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Does anyone have questions for Jennifer?
Mary does. Mary, you need to unmute.
Jennifer, thank you very much. How does it work when somebody has a new development? So it's not a renaming, but it's the initial naming of streets.
That comes from our land development section. Public service, we don't have anything to do with that. That's all from land development in CDOT. And all of those names are submitted on all maps and forms that land development looks at, and then that goes to Mecklenburg County, and they approve or deny those names.
When you say Mecklenburg County, what part of Mecklenburg County? Which
GIS. It's Angela Norwood at the county. She approves all new land development names.
Angela, somebody in the GIS department?
Yes, Norwood, Norward.
Okay. And
those are all new names.
Do they have any guidelines to go by?
Yes, they typically follow the same guidelines as we do. It can be any first or last names, no more than 22 characters. So they pretty much follow the same guidelines as the city. We do not want business names anymore, so they follow that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Would you, I'm sorry, I couldn't, you broke up or there was a background noise. Could you say again what the city's guidelines are? Is someone moving something around?
Can you hear?
I can now. I couldn't hear what you said about what the um, current city's guidelines are.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. The city's guidelines for renaming streets.
Not renaming well, are there guidelines for the renaming? And then I guess besides not the process, but the actual names.
It can be more than 22 characters, no first or last names, and no business names. Those are three of our main guidelines that we go by, and the request to rename for renaming streets.
So you don't use people's names at all?
No first and last names. Let's say someone wants to name the street Michael Jones. We prefer not to do that anymore. We don't use first and last names.
Right, but you're saying you can use last name. You could do Jones. She's saying not have two names.
So,
in
correct.
one street. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Usually when someone wants to rename a street, from what I've seen in the last 20 years, they want to honor someone that has passed away that lived on that street. So Mary Jones lived on Tay Street, so they want to rename it Mary Jones, and we don't allow that.
I see, but you allow Jones Street if that were.
If it's not a duplicate, yes.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Thank you.
I have a question on that. Wanted to ask a question on that about when you have either change names or particularly new names, new subdivisions. You know, one of the things we've been going through is trying to figure out in some cases who some of the streets were named after. Is there any history kept of that, or does anybody have to give any reason, like this was a person who lived on the street, or we're naming it this way because, you know, I always like going down to, you know, Kiowa, so I'm naming this Kiowa Street. I mean, is there any kind of history like that that's kept of reasons that developers would choose to for a particular theme, or anybody changing a street name?
Not that we keep, not that we keep here at the city. We just pretty much once a developer picks a new name, the county they have a system. I'm not really sure how that works, but they go through and look at everything. As long as it's not a sound-alike or a duplicate, they would more than likely approve it. So
you can't have a Tremont Road and a Tremont Place and Tremont Court. You couldn't do that, is what I hear you saying.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Within the last few years, we have stopped that because of emergency services. They have requested, it causes confusion with their systems they have. Someone might be in a car wreck and not know it's Tremont Avenue, but they're actually on Tremont Road.
Right. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions about this?
Yeah, I had a question. Just what was the reasoning behind forbidding streets named for people?
For first and last names, a lot of it is because people steal those street name markers, and we have to replace them usually every 2 to 3 months.
It's very practical.
Yes, so they typically get missing very fast. Yeah. And then you have some of the neighbors that maybe they didn't appreciate being named Mary Jones. It's just a lot like that. So we get a lot of feedback, but a lot of it was that the markers would always end up being gone within 2 to 3 months, and we have to replace them over and over.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions, comments?
This may be more of a FYI, but is there any distinction on what is an avenue, street, place, whatever? Does it have to be a certain length, size, or location?
No, that comes from the county. They have a mapping system over in mapping, and they decide if it's an avenue, road, street, drive, or lane.
This is Lena with the city attorneys. Jennifer, I just want to make clear so that everybody understands, and as we go forward, if in case questions come up. So for existing street names, if we want to make a change, CDOT manages that process, and the criteria are set out on that website. And I think you and Tiffany had shared that link with us. And for new developments, that is done through Mecklenburg County's building standards and GIS. Is that right? And they have criteria that is similar to the cities?
Correct. Land development, the names are submitted with the plans in land development and then approved through Mecklenburg County for new development. Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure, Emily and Tiffany, that everybody understands the distinction we're drawing. So the city does it for the existing ones that are city maintained, and then the others go when plans come in and the city does its plan review. It goes through the rest of that process.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Correct.
you.
So, Lena, if the commission were suggesting names, then those would actually be recommendations that would be made to the county. If they were, well, they would be for the city for those obviously the ones if the city chooses to rename, but that whole idea of kind of collecting a directory of possible names for new development, that's really not. I'm sorry, I'm talking to think, but the clarification is the names we would be recommending would be those that would only be renamed because those are the ones the city controls.
Those are existing city streets, correct.
Yes,
but I think for anything that is new, and I don't know, and maybe Jennifer can clarify, if when we say land development, I don't know if we're talking about the city's land development division or if it is county land development for the new ones. So it may be that we can make a policy recommendation and it will require some working with the county staff.
That's correct.
And probably the county elected officials as well, potentially.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Because this has been something that everyone has really wanted to understand better.
This is Kathy. Jen and I work together. I think the only thing that I would add that I haven't really heard emphasized here is that when we rename streets, we don't just arbitrarily do that. We do it at someone's request, usually somebody in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And it does require some community engagement and public support. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's like a petition process, really. And we do that because it can be somewhat burdensome depending on what property owners are on that street, if it's residences, businesses, that type of thing. So we do run it through that process rather than impose that on folks. And I just want to make certain that we understand that.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask one more question too, just to make sure? And I came on a little bit late. The name suggestions or the name changes that we're proposing, would they have to meet the same criteria, the 60% of owners on that road, or are we in this way going around that process some way?
Jen, is it 60 or 75%?
Bear with me a moment.
I believe it's 75%.
I think
it is 75. It's 75%.
75%.
I'm getting my petition confused with the street name change. It is 75% of owners. So unless it was changed, yes, you would need parcel owners to approve it.
But for the purposes of this commission, since it was a charge from the mayor, our charge is to give that information and then present that to council so that we can just determine if for these parameters, does a policy change need to be modified for cases in which these names have implications that are outlined in our charge? So it's a both and, it's not either or.
Okay. B, you had a question or comment.
Yeah, and Tiffany may have just answered part of it, because given the parameters, we were just told that even if we made a suggestion on a street, and many of the names we've looked at have been prominent names that are on streets that have quite a few either businesses or residences as such, there's a good possibility says still may not pass muster. I'm kind of curious about that, because if we're talking about 60 or 70% approval, I know the public process, and yes, I'm glad that's there. But does that make what we're doing almost moot if the people say, well, that's a good idea on the street and we're not going to change it, and we never reach that threshold? Then what do we do?
Well, I think that, as Tiffany indicated, that's actually the determination for city council, that whether they're going to alter that policy because of an overriding concern. But that's their decision. We give the recommendations based on criteria that we've developed based on the charge they gave us. But I don't think we can answer that question, B. And I don't think, in my sense, I'm not speaking for city staff, but I think it's really what policy guidelines the city council provides.
Okay, I just wanted to be in my head clear, not thinking and we got all these suggestions, and then it gets the council, and the way this policy is set up currently, unless they make changes to accommodate the recommendations we're making, it's not going to happen.
That is true.
That's correct. But city council sets that policy, so they're able to modify that policy. It's not beyond their scope to change that policy because it's set by council.
Mm-hmm. Deborah, was your hand up? I'm sorry, I couldn't see there a minute. No? Okay. Any further discussion on thank you so much for the clarification, Kathy, and I believe it was Jennifer. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I don't know if this context helps. When I spoke to Tiffany, I explained why that public engagement and that support was so important under the current policy. Again, this is just assuming, that we're talking about the current policy only. So if you consider, and this has happened to us in the past, if you consider maybe a low-income neighborhood, particularly, and many of the properties or rentals, or it's just maybe people have lived there for 30 years or whatever, and say they're elderly, and many of them are relying on Social Security, and they have their medication shipped to them, and and the burden of having people change their address can be a little overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be very expensive if they have to go out and get a new driver's license. If, there are just things that, you got to contact Social Security and change your address, and then you have to contact your banks, and, then you've got to contact all the utilities, and it ends up compounding to a point where the benefit from the street name change, then the city just sort of steps away, and now it's the residents that are sitting there holding the bag going, oh God, now I'm not getting my mail, or my mail is delayed, and so I have to do all these other things. I've got to change where my car is registered, and I have to go through the DMV, and then I have to get my license, and my Social Security check didn't come, all those kinds of, even the IRS, you have to change it. So I realize that an address change is part of a normal process for people who move anyway. But for those of us that have, and I move kind of often, boy, it's a nuisance. It is just really a nuisance to change your address. And so we don't want to place a burden on folks who, aren't equipped necessarily or financially prepared to take that on. So if there is a council policy change, I hope that there's a way to be able to help those who might need the financial assistance to make it happen, or even the technology assistance, right? I mean, some folks don't have the ability to go online and change their contact information with a bank or the IRS or Social Security. It can be daunting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you, Kathy.
Yeah,
I think that in earlier discussions, the whole I mean, as we focused from thinking about monuments principally to street names, the whole issue of feasibility and cost is a very real one. And again, that is something that city council is going to weigh. I mean, I think what our charge is to look at names, and by criteria we developed, say that these are emblematic of values that Charlotte does not support. I mean, that the legacy they are honoring and glorifying are so out of sync with today's values and the kind of inclusive city we want to be, that the committee wants to say these are the ones that really should be changed if you're going to change the policy. But that is really city council's determination.
right. Do we have anybody in this group, Tiffany, from Housing and Neighborhood Services?
We do not, but we can get whomever.
They are so great when it comes to neighborhood outreach. They're really in touch with like neighborhood leaders and making things happen in that regard. And they might just be kind of a nice I guess a good partner to have if this is something that does move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been working with community relations and communications about the community engagement process. And I know Lacey and Federico have will in some way hopefully assist us with, because they've been really grassroots about getting community feedback and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Well, because we have so much ground to cover, we need to move on. Thank you again, Kathy and Jennifer. And if you would like to stay for the discussion, please feel free, or hop off if you need to move on. I hope everyone had a chance to review the full document. It is draft form. There are so many fabulous writers on this commission that I hope will ultimately someone can edit and help polish it. But we needed to get down kind of the basic framework and move through the various decision points. And so that's what we're going to begin right now. The charge really was to review Confederate monuments and street names. And what we discovered is that currently all the Confederate monuments that are under city control are no longer in public spaces beyond Elmwood Cemetery. And Lena, I believe what you sent documented that for Tiffany and me. So if that is true, that the Confederate monuments and markers are in Elmwood Cemetery, we've had a couple of discussions about the idea that cemeteries are an appropriate place for them, not in the public square, that cemeteries and battlefields are where people are memorialized and remembered. And a fundamental question is, do we all agree with that assessment, that that is an appropriate place for monuments and markers that have been removed to live at Elmwood Cemetery, there is a Confederate section where Confederate soldiers are buried. And the obelisk was, I think, the first marker that was put in there, as Dr. Cox said. So a fundamental, I don't know why I'm getting echo now. So a fundamental question is, does the commission agree with that assessment? First of all,
hold on, Emily, can you hold on for just 1 second? I'm going to try to mute everyone. Can you hold on for Go ahead, Emily, and unmute yourself. We're getting a bad echo from yours. Can you try to unmute yourself and then go ahead? Emily, you'll need to unmute.
Okay, there you go. Is this better?
Yes,
okay.
That's much better. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what I did, or I hadn't touched anything. I don't know why it changed. Anyway, the first question is, do we as a commission believe that Elmwood Cemetery is an appropriate location as a cemetery for Confederate monuments and markers? That's part A. And then if the commission members agree that that is the case, then the recommendation would be to contextualize those monuments and give background about how they came to be based upon what we have learned from Dr. Cox. Fanny, I will mute myself, and then I believe you had indicated that you wanted to speak.
No, I was having some problems with my video, so no.
Emily, you're on mute.
I muted myself, so it's not, sorry. So does anyone else want to comment about the cemetery as an appropriate location for Confederate monuments and markers?
And Emily, before that, maybe I can just share. So the list that we got, this is Lena James, was a list that was compiled and put together by the city's general services staff, as well as the transportation, and I think some other folks who are responsible for right-of-way management and landscape management for the city. These are also some of the folks who are responsible for maintaining our public cemeteries. So my understanding in discussing this very briefly with one of the attorneys in our office who works more closely with this, as well as with our folks in landscape management, is that the city did an inventory and an assessment shortly after the Charleston shooting, and reviewed all the monuments and markers. And as a course of that review and that inventory, that's where I think you have the update, Emily, that maybe was shared with you about where things were done. So I just wanted to provide that context that it was done not too long ago, but obviously quite a bit has changed even since then. But that was the context. So it's relatively updated in that sense.
And Emily, as we had a conversation last week, I was able to go down to the cemetery and take pictures, and I can share there's just about 10 or 15 pictures of all the markers that are in the cemetery. I can run through them very briefly. It won't take much.
Could you do that very quickly? That would be great.
Can everyone see? Let me see. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can see that, Billy.
All right. Okay. So this is just the overview of the background from the. Most of the markers there are individual markers that were dedicated by local groups that, and this is one of the first ones, the Confederate States of America, that honors the Mecklenburg Guards who fought in the Civil War, the 49th Regiment, and it was erected or dedicated in 2001. There's the Mecklenburg Boer Guards that was dedicated in 1999. I couldn't make out, but what this marker, the images or the sketching of it was, but this is right in front of the obelisk. So I imagine that it accompanies the obelisk itself. Obelisk. This just talks about who maintains the plot. Major Egbert A. Ross, Sons of the Confederate Veterans. That's at the front of the plot as you enter through the gate. This is the Confederate States Navy Yard, which was erected initially in Uptown Charlotte in 1910. I'm not sure, it doesn't give a date when it was relocated to the cemetery. This is another monument dedicated to a local regiment, the Charlotte Greys, and it was dedicated in 1999. This is the marker that was erected and that was in front of the Dowd YMCA in 1994. And I believe when it went through remodeling, it was moved to the cemetery. This is just a general marker that was dedicated by the Confederate Memorial Association in 1977, added to the plot. And so there were a few that were these monuments that were dedicated to officers of the Civil War or the Confederacy who had no connection to Charlotte whatsoever. And this was one of them. It's labeled General A.P. Hill. Initially, I thought it was Daniel Hill, but realized that it's A.P. Hill, who was I believe he was Stonewall Jackson's right-hand man, but he has no connection to Charlotte. How it got into the Elmwood Cemetery, I have no idea. And this is another case, the Colonel Thomas S. Keenan. He was the noted Attorney General of North Carolina from 1877 to 1885, but no connections to Charlotte. And then the obelisk itself, just the inscription on the front, erected by women of Charlotte. This was not connected to any group that was noted as the Daughters of the American Confederacy, 1887. And so I think this would have been the earliest monument in Charlotte erected. And the side says, we honor them and remember them. And just the date of the war, 1861 to 1865. And so that is the rest of the rest are just headstones. You're on mute.
Thank you so much for that overview, and thanks so much for taking time to go and physically review what was there. So the fundamental question is, do we agree that that is an appropriate location for those monuments and markers? I mean, that's the first question. Everyone agrees with that, please thumbs up, and if down, no, or maybe you want to talk about it more. So all commission members, please. I can't see everybody. I think everybody is thumbs up. I can't see yours, Fanny, but that's just because your name is it up? Okay. So thank you. So we are agreeing that the cemetery is an appropriate location. Now, having said that, the second part of the recommendation is the commission recommends placement of interpretive panels to give context about the origins of the various Confederate monuments markers located in Elmwood Cemetery. So are we recommending contextualization that gives a fuller history of Confederate monuments? Comments, questions? Again, there are a lot of, let's see, oopsie, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the contextualization part is fine. I wonder if we need to somehow, in what Dr. Griffin showed seemed to me to be pretty clearly in the memorialization camp as opposed to the glorification camp. But I wonder if we need to figure out where the line is between memorializing dead and glorifying the cause that they fought for. And since a lot of these were, put up in the last 20 years, it's not unheard of that people are going to want to be putting more stuff there that may creep over the line into, the glorious cause for which these people fought. And I wonder if we want to just figure out how do we make clear that memorializing is different from glorification.
Excellent point. So that's one thing, the glorification versus the memorialization. Tom, did you have your hand up?
Nope, did not have my hand up.
No.
I'm good.
Others, comments? Anybody?
I think this is Lynn Norman. Mary's right. I think part of it is going to be, at least for, I think in the contextualizing, I think we need to, include kind of what we're doing here to why we're sort of, the city council made a decision to, to change things and bring these monuments brought in there, or these markers, whatever, and talk about why we're doing that and how we want to be a more inclusive city, and give some context why we're making all those changes. I think that, like you said, it was only 20 some years ago when people came and started putting markers in there again. I think that may just come down to, I guess the city controls that, and hopefully would not let markers go in whose sole purpose is to glorify, the cause. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Other comments? I mean, I don't know Elmwood, the location, I mean, the layout, but if there were, I mean, later in the recommendations, we're going to talk about future commemorative spaces. I mean, is there a space where there could be a kind of cohesive presentation, perhaps, as opposed, I don't know. I don't know, and I don't know exactly. There's a lot to be worked out in terms of where would each piece have an interpretive panel, or would there be something at the entrance or that sort of thing? I don't know. B, please.
Yeah, Emily. I was thinking. Said my concern would be when there becomes another space other than a cemetery. Does it become a rallying point for people to later say, we will meet here, our ancestors are? The idea of memorializing in a cemetery to me fits, because that's what it is. Not trying to erase anybody's history. But I am concerned that if there is a public space someplace else, when we say, well, we don't have any more space in that cemetery for memorials, but we want to do some, that's when you cross that thin line with glorification, because now there could possibly be a quote unquote public space where people are meeting to profess something that would be totally against what this committee is looking at, what this commission is looking at, if you see what I'm saying. I'm hoping we don't open up a new area, as someone claims, almost like sororities and fraternities do on a college campus, this is our block and this is what we do, and you had better not be in this block. So I may be taking this further than what you're thinking, but I'm thinking in terms of if we are just seeing a lot of these memorials coming up, and I was very surprised. I'm glad that Dr. Griffin did that, because from 1999 to now, at least a third, almost half of those memorials were put into Elmwood. So when it gets to the point of you say there's no more space in the Confederate area of Elmwood, we need a new public space. Then do we fall into that glorification of someone saying, this is our space and you cannot be here, even though it is public space? How do we walk that line? Because I would be very concerned about that in the future, and saying this is a space other than in a cemetery where memorials should be.
No, I completely agree with that. I just simply meant I didn't know the physical location of where at Elmwood the interpretive panels. I wasn't at all proposing. I think that we would make a statement that monuments and Confederate memorials are appropriately placed in the Confederate section of Elmwood Cemetery. I wasn't proposing any memorials anywhere else. I was just not familiar enough with
I understood that part. I'm just concerned that are we leaving that wiggle room for glorification in a different space later? That's the only thing I'm bringing up now. But I understood what you were saying. And Elmwood is in the dark in the back street, so it's very limited.
Yeah, B, thank you for that comment. That we would not want to do that. That's certainly not the intent. Others have any comments? Tom?
I've been over to Elmwood recently, and everything that Will took pictures of is within a kind of a square cast iron fence. And that, I think, for this purpose, makes it very easy to do one panel near the fence someplace, probably outside the fence, that says, this is what this is. So I think it's not scattered all over the cemetery. It's all in one place. It's nicely fenced in. It's well defined. And so I think that makes this request that's in the draft just so doable.
Okay, would you recommend, hearing you say that, would you recommend changing it to say the commission recommends placement of interpretive panel, and then the S is kind of in parens depending to give context? I mean, so it's essentially one spot that interprets this whole Confederate section and its memorials. Okay. Well, we have a lot to cover, so, and street names, I think, are going to be even more complicated. So,
can I ask one question before we go? There was a statement there. Did we get all the markers or monuments? And there are two on Tryon Street, which we talked about earlier, that I didn't see listed there. One was up 123 South Tryon Street. It's just now it's just a granite marker, but it used to have a bronze thing on the front of it saying that it was where the last meeting of the Confederate cabinet was. Then there was another place further down Tryon Street in front of McCormick and Schmick, which was so this is where Jefferson Davis was standing when he heard that Lincoln had been assassinated. And when I looked at something Tom had sent me about monuments, they're both sort of governed by the Chamber of Commerce, and apparently the one at 123 sits on private property. Not sure about the other one, but I didn't know if we needed to do anything about the second one, which is still there, just where Jefferson Davis was standing. The other one, they have removed the actual plaque that was on it. I don't know if that's the Chamber of Commerce or whoever. Although the granite monument is still there. But I didn't know about the Jefferson Davis thing. If we need to think about, does anything need to be done with?
It is a plaque. It was not listed as one of the city controlled.
It may not be. It may be like the other one, it may be on private property. right in front of McCormick and Schmick's, comes up close to the road, but maybe far enough back that it's not on the maybe private property, just like the other one. I wonder if we should, I don't know how we can find that out.
Well, by next week we need to determine if it is under city control or not.
Yeah, it may not be. Maybe like the other one.
It,
on private property.
Not to labor on this too long, but maybe I misunderstood what we were discussing earlier, not about future ones that may be going to this space in the cemetery, but about putting informational placards up or panels. And I guess I've sort of looked at cemeteries. I'm a Catholic. I look at consecrated ground. And I guess I sort of look at it as the cemetery is sort of the end of items, not the beginning. And I almost feel as though, do we have any other placards that are in cemeteries? Because this is a cemetery that would give some type of contextual information about the individuals there or monuments that are there. And I guess I look at it as, are we drawing more attention to something that perhaps the statement of where they're going is the statement?
Well,
it is
actually under the North Carolina statute, we actually can't move anything there. Is my understanding. This is the interpretive panel, or is to interpret it, the purpose of it is to interpret those items that are there.
Again, this is cemetery, and I think by definition, it almost speaks for itself. I think if we begin to make it more of a political perspective or more informative, I think we're drawing more attention to it. You know, let it rest with their bones. Let's just sort of leave that where it's at, which is a cemetery.
It's kind of what we're doing with the monuments. So even those that are, you might say, are glorifying, you're basically taking them there to die or be buried. I mean, I know what you're saying, but it's kind of like it's the past, you know, where.
I'm trying to think, in some of the famous cemeteries around the world, there are places, I believe, where there's some interpretive panels, not necessarily but making a political statement. And I don't think we're trying to make a political statement. I think we're trying to provide historical context, especially to those that are the monuments.
Yeah.
I'm not sure with the Elmwood Cemetery. Lynn Weiss, is it Weiss? I'm not maybe mispronouncing as Weiss. Yes, he's over the cemetery right now, and I do understand that they are doing some tours through there, and it may be good to reach out to him to see how they are treating that particular part of the cemetery when they do tours through the cemetery. I'm not sure if anyone has gone on one of these tours. Tom, you may know a little bit about the tours.
I'd just like to add something here about that. Atlanta has done contextual panels in their historic cemetery, Oakwood Cemetery, where there are Confederate monuments. So it's not something that's, you know, unheard of, especially because these sites do become tourist destinations. And so, and because it is under city control, it wouldn't be, I don't know that it would be inappropriate to have contextual panels as they've done in Atlanta.
Okay. Thank you for that information, Karen. Okay. We do need to move on. But before we do, let's do a thumbs up, thumbs down, or maybe on contextual panel or panels near the Confederate section in Elmwood Cemetery. I think that's those who, thank you, those who don't agree. or want more consideration? Mike, you're the. I think that we will recommend moving forward. I will have to see about if we poll people who aren't here today, but for now, we will be putting that recommendation in, I think. Now moving toward the street names, which is really the heart of these deliberations. We came up with two criteria that everyone agreed on, that the highest priority would be given to the streets named for Confederate leaders and officers and individuals who actively fought against equality by advocating for white supremacy. And last meeting, we did a poll, and from that poll, the names that are listed are the ones that surfaced because they were associated with Confederate leaders or leaders of white supremacist campaigns. There was much less agreement on the whole issue of slave owners as such. So I think that what we need to do is really have a fuller discussion about different groups of street names. I think and there have been some additional research that Lynn and Tom have uncovered and want to raise. I think that let's start with where there is, I think, universal agreement is on the names of streets, streets named for white supremacists. And as I understood it, leaders in that campaign were Aycock, Governor Morrison, the two streets, and then Zebulon for Zebulon Vance, the governor. Is there agreement around those names, or does anyone have any comments? I can't see. Let me see. Let me move this out of the way. Does anyone want to make any comments about those names? Oops, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. Just a second. There, now. Any comments? If there are no comments, then are we thumbs up on all of those names? Okay. Lynn, I'm not seeing everybody.
Okay.
Lynn?
Yeah, I'm okay. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So now in terms of leaders of the Confederacy, the ones where there was near unanimity on the poll last week were Bragg, Jefferson Davis, Hill, and Stonewall Jackson. So let's first, do we all agree on those names? Or does anyone have any comments before we discuss others that are associated with the Confederacy that aren't on the list? But is everyone in agreement with those?
I have one comment related to this list. Yesterday, Tom sent an email, and I've started going back and putting in footnotes for this much longer list that I sent out to the committee so that we know where we're getting the information. There's one article that came from a September 11th, 1947 Charlotte Observer newspaper that was an interview with Barringer, one of the Barringer children, who suggested that Jackson Street, there's a Jackson Avenue off of East 10th Street that is adjacent to Piedmont IB Middle School. It is also named for Stonewall Jackson. It was not included on the original list. Okay, great. Thank you for that addition. That's terrific. So I would assume everyone, that we would, if it's a name for Stonewall Jackson, that name would be added before we discuss others. But
I believe there was agreement on those names that are directly linked to well-known Confederate leaders. Now, again, let me see. I'm sorry, I can't. This is so hard. I mean, I can't see people, but Kristen, are you in on this one? I can't see. Okay. Now there has been some additional research on some other names that are directly linked with the Confederacy that have surfaced. Lynn, do you want to talk about
Sure.
the two that you uncovered?
Yeah, I went down, I was trying to figure out, Bragg Street. And it's always hard to figure out if this really is named after Braxton Bragg. But I started looking, and I noticed that Mosby Drive crossed that. And I grew up in Virginia, and John Mosby was known as the Gray Ghost. He was a colonel in the Confederate cavalry. He, as far as I know, never came to North Carolina. All his battles were fought up there. But it's just kind of interesting that his that Mosby Lane intersects with Bragg Street. So that started me thinking. And so I took that little neighborhood, I guess you'll call it. It's really an apartment or maybe a condo complex called Bennington Place, and looked at some of the other names, just punching in the name and Civil War, and found there was another street named Deschler there. That there was a Deschler who was a brigadier general in the Civil War from Alabama. He died at Chickamauga, and Braxton, he reported up to Bragg. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And then I found 3 streets that were named after obscure battles in the Eastern Carolinas: Tranter's Creek, Kinston Bridge, and Gold Hill. What those have to do with any of the people, I have no idea, but obviously there's some kind of a Confederate theme here. So I think we have 2, I wouldn't worry about the battles, but I think we have 2 streets that appear to have been named after, besides Bragg, Mosby Lane, and I think it's Deschler Street or something.
Court, Deschler Court.
Deschler Court, sorry. Deschler Court, that appear to be named after Confederate officers.
Okay.
There's also a Union officer
yes,
in the same complex as well.
I think we keep his name.
Thoughts about adding Mosby and Dressler to the list as Confederate leaders? All those that think they should be added, thumbs up, or? Is that everybody? I'm sorry, hold them high because I can't see. Some people's are behind. Yeah, okay.
I suggest when you put your thumb up, put it right near your face, because otherwise you're all around the camera frame.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone opposed to adding those 2? Anyone want more discussion about that? All right, we will add Mosby and Dressler. Now, are there other names, other streets names for individuals that we should consider? Tom, you had one that you thought met the criteria that we missed.
Yeah, last time when we went over this initially, we were pressed for time, and the very last entry was Behringer Drive. And I'm curious about Behringer Drive because my daughter went to Behringer School. And so let me share with you what I found just recently, and some of it less than an hour ago. The school, as Dr. Griffin said, is named for relatives of Osmond Behringer. His dad, Rufus, who was a Confederate general, his brother, Paul, who was a white supremacist academic. That's the school. Behringer Drive, which you would think be named for the same set of folk, Behringer, humbly, says in the Charlotte Observer that he named it after himself. So Behringer Drive is named after Osmond Behringer. So I look up more about Osmond Behringer and found two things. One is that in 1900, he was one of the main leaders of the big white supremacy campaign rally that gathered thousands of people in the principle of white supremacy right before the big election of 1900. He was the marshal for Charlotte Township. And then, so that's at the beginning. Later on, he donated the land for Revolution Park. And in it, he put a deed restriction that said if the property was ever used by African Americans, that it would revert to him or there would be a fee paid. That's fairly normal. But in 1951, there was a suit by the NAACP to desegregate the park. And that reverter clause came up. And Osmond Behringer, just found this morning, was quoted in the paper saying, let's see, I don't have it exactly, that he thought that let me find my email.
Yeah, you sent it. Let me see it. Here it is, Tom. It is my opinion.
He said his position was, quote, this is the Charlotte Observer speaking, the reverter clause still indeed holds good. Quote from Behringer, it is my opinion, he said, that the Negroes are not ready for this step yet. So as an early leader of the white supremacy campaign and as someone who was publicly opposed to desegregation in the face of an NAACP lawsuit in 1951, I think he fits our criteria in the same way that Aycock Morrison do.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that background. All those in favor of adding Behringer Drive to the list. Thumbs up.
And as one who grew up on Behringer Drive, my family from 1967 until now, I'll speak for them and say you can change it.
Thank you, B. Okay. Well, those who want, thank you. Are there any others that fit those criteria of either Confederate leaders or white supremacist leaders that we want to consider? Lynn, do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah. Clarkson Street. I didn't see that on here, and I thought it was one we decided might have been he was a leader of the white supremacist movement or had something to do with that.
I remember, Dr. Griffin, can you tell me that? That was there were all kinds of Clarksons and which Clarkson. So,
right.
So we need clarification on that. No, thank you, Lynn, for bringing that one up.
Yeah. So I went back and did a little more research on the Clarkson name, and it first appeared in the Charlotte Observer in 1888. But the Clarkson name began to gain prominence in Charlotte beginning in 1871 when Walter Beaumont Clarkson came to Charlotte and tried to reestablish the North Carolina Military Institute started by General Hill. He remained principal of the Military Institute for 4 years. He died in 1875. But his brother, William Clarkson, also became a prominent member of the Charlotte community shortly after the Civil War. He was a general. He was a captain in the Confederate Army, a graduate of the Citadel. But after the war, he came to Charlotte as a conductor on the Charlotte, Columbia, and Augusta Railroad, which was a very prominent position to have as railroads were growing. And he remained the conductor in that position for over 15 years and later assumed the same role in the Atlantic, Tennessee, and Ohio Railroad. But he was the father of Harriet Clarkson. And Harriet Clarkson was born in 1863. So by 1888, when Clarkson Street first appeared, he would have only been around 25 years old. But in 1887, the year before it appeared as a street, he was a vice mayor of Charlotte. So it could have very well been named after Harriet Clarkson. But again, we just can't be sure about that. But all three of the Clarkson men were prominent members of Charlotte. And so it's more likely named for Harriet or his father. But from 1887 to 1889, Harriet Clarkson was vice mayor of Charlotte, and also in 1891 and 1893, he was also vice mayor again. And you know about his career as a associate justice in North Carolina Supreme Court, and eventually he became a prominent leader in the local and statewide white supremacy movements as manager of Cameron Morrison's governorship campaign. Mm. So, I mean, if Tom pointed out that the Clarkson Street was in the vicinity where the railroads used to run, and believe it or not, ironically it is a street that leads into Elmwood Cemetery right now. So again, I mean, it's a I don't know, it's a toss up. I can't really make a judgment because there is no again, the same article that I mentioned, that Tom mentioned, that quotes Osmond Barringer. He suggests that Clarkson Street was named for Harriet Clarkson in that article as well. So
the Osmond Barringer thought it was named for Harriet.
He does.
Clarkson.
He does. Yes, and that's a 1947 article. So
name for the son, Harriet.
Name for the son, Harriet. Yes.
Who was a white supremacist.
Who was the white supremacist? That's correct.
I'll ask the doctors on the call, PhDs. Is that sufficient proof to call him or to say, in your view, the street was named after him, and the fact it was mentioned in that article by the other person?
I'll let Tom sort of chime in on this. We went back and forth over a few emails, and Tom has I'm sure he wants to share his opinion about it.
Tom, go ahead.
I'm seriously no fan of Harriet Clarkson, who was the guy who actually led the white supremacy campaign that Osmond Barringer was the co-leader of. But I think that we just don't know which Clarkson the street's named after. And some of the Clarksons were educators and railroad people. Some of them were white supremacists, and not being able to nail down the exact connection, I don't think will give confidence to people as they consider making this change.
Okay.
And so I think if we can't confidently recommend that, this is the history and this is why we're doing it, I think it's smart for us to back off at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Others agree with that assessment? I mean, one of the things that we're going to say in there, that any recommendations we make will have solid documentation behind them. And if this one lacks solid documentations, do commission members agree with not including Clarkson on the list? Put by the face, please. Okay. Very good. Now, those, as I understand it, are there any others from the historians or anyone on the commission that fit those criteria that clearly are named for Confederate leaders or white supremacists? Because those are the names that we have kind of universally agreed on, and those criteria. Are there any others that fit those criteria? Okay. Now, that being said, these are the names that we would be recommending, that we will put out to the community for their feedback, and that we will be talking to City Council about in saying that meet those criteria. One commission member who could not be on the call today raised the issue of that we are not recommending strictly any individuals and streets named for them that for their slave owning. And we've had lots of discussions and there was no consensus. But I think that we need to be mindful that we are not including that category, that we believe that those who meet these two criteria merit change, and that we make a statement about sort of almost probably 100 street names if you go through all of them that are connected with slave owning or the antebellum South. I think we just need to have clarity of that, because we're going to need to be speaking with one voice on that issue, that we're not recommending street names solely based on slave owning. Dr. Griffin last time said that there were no leaders like John Calhoun who were known across the South as major proponents of slavery and leaving the Union for slavery. So but I think we need to be very clear on that, and I will be talking to the commission member. But are there any comments about our not including major slave owners simply because they were slave owners on the list?
What I will say is that I was asked last time to see if I could do a little more research about the nature or the kinds of the names that we do have on the list, what kind of slave owners they were, if you want to judge them based on that. I mean, the fact that they owned slaves was abhorrent, but it's hard to tell what kind of slave owners many of these men were, because there's just not a lot of things written about them. The Behringers have a very interesting history. They date back to the founding of the county. They were an aristocratic family from this area, and it seemed from generation to generation, their opinions about slavery shifted. General Rufus Behringer's grandfather was able to accumulate over 1,000 acres of land in Cabarrus County. And once he got to the point of where he had owned a number of plantations, a cotton mill, he decided that he did not agree with slavery anymore, but instead of freeing his enslaved Africans, he gave them to his son, and his son took them to Mississippi, deeper south. So, I mean, that's kind of hypocritical within itself. The Clarkson family, they come from a large slave owning family, and whether the street is named for Harriet or his father, the interesting thing about his father is that I said that he was a colonel or a captain during the Civil War, and his slave accompanied him throughout the war. And when he was wounded, there's information that suggests that his slave is the person who carried him off the battlefield, and he remained with him even after, even at the end of the Civil War and until his death in 1894, I believe. So what does that say about his relationship with the people that he owned? We still don't know until we, sort of, unless those voices of those enslaved are actually lifted up off of the pages. So the other folks like Hezekiah Alexander, I couldn't find any more information besides the number of slaves. He owned 13 slaves at his death, which put him in the top 1% of slaveholders in Mecklenburg County. And there's just no way of telling what kind of slaveholders they were. And as you said, Emily, many of the streets named after people in Charlotte, the majority of them, if they were signers of the Mecklenburg or a part of that Mecklenburg founding families, they owned slaves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for that additional background. Any other comments on this issue? Because I think it's one that we will be asked about.
Hi, Emily, this is Tiffany. I've been trying to keep my video off so you all can see each other and don't have to see me. But Levester just sent me a note. And he has a thumbs up for all the votes. He's having some technical difficulties, but he has a thumbs up for all the votes, and he's able to listen, but he can't put his thumb up. So I just wanted to put that up there. So he is listening and following.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I would just add one more thing, Emily, I'm sorry. If we do consider slave owners on this list, or if you all do, I mean, I think a person who I would think is ripe to go on the list would be James Walker Osborne. There's an Osborne Street right off of North Tryon, where you see a lot of the homeless people gather for to get meals whenever they pass them out. But he is the person who designated his home as the Confederate headquarters when Jefferson Davis and the last meeting, the last cabinet meeting, he's one of those people. Not Osborne. I gave you the wrong person. Not Osborne. Who was it? The list.
I'm trying to read them.
Hold on 1 second. It wasn't Osborne.
Is it Pfeiffer?
Pfeiffer was the person. Yes. Pfeiffer. Both Pfeiffer and Osborne were the two largest slave-owning families at the start of the Civil War, and Pfeiffer Avenue is located right across from the Hal Marshall Center.
That Willie, that reference you said about hosting Jefferson Davis, I don't think it's in the entry we were given.
Is it?
If it's Pfeiffer, I'm looking at Pfeiffer.
It's Osborne or Pfeiffer. Let me make sure. Let me go to my other list. Hold on 1 second. Yes, it was Pfeiffer. I didn't put it on the entry. I have two separate lists, and I'm still editing this draft, and so I'll make sure that it's added there. But Pfeiffer was the person who, his home was located at 722 North Tryon.
Yeah, I see it as number 20.
Yeah, but I didn't add the information about him hosting, the headquarters for Beauregard and yeah.
So he hosted the last Confederate cabinet meeting that was held here in Charlotte.
Yeah, they use his home as a base. So obviously he was in support of, the war and prolonging slavery as long as he could.
Yeah. Thoughts about that?
I think he would merit being put on the list to have the street changed. Because of his support in a real material way of the Confederacy at the towards the end.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with Lynn, because that's two strikes, not only supporting the war, but suppressing the freedom of African Americans. So that's two out of several of the points that we were looking for. So that would put him on the list.
Okay, all those for adding Pfeiffer to the list, Pfeiffer Avenue. Is that? Okay. Well, I think that those will be the ones that we will, next week when we review the final draft before it's put out for community comment, those will be the ones we will have additional. I think collectively we're saying we're not going to recommend wholesale change of all the streets in Charlotte that are named for people who owned enslaved African, that or enslaved people, that in part going back to the whole issue of feasibility and cost. But I think that we make a statement about why these two categories in the entire symbolic landscape are the most emblematic of values we find abhorrent. I guess that's, I don't know. Some of you that are great wordsmiths, we need to come up with a general statement. Any final comments, and then we will hopefully be able to move more quickly through we have about 35 minutes to review
I could
the
just
rest
say
of.
something quickly.
Sure, Lynn.
I've struggled with that, I've struggled with the thing about the slavery, and I don't know if when you talk about how do we justify it, or I don't know if just rationalization. I think something I'd mentioned maybe last time was that, a lot of these people who had enslaved people were sort of founding, as Dr. Griffin said, they were founding families of Mecklenburg County. And so, normally forgetting the slavery issue, a lot of places, they would name streets after sort of their founding families. And, you've got that issue that, we'd be giving up that whole legacy of our founding. Now, maybe something overcomes that, but to me, that's about the only justification I can come to for that. I think there's some others like Johnston and Audrey and Kell, etc., who owned slaves, and I can't figure out those streets obviously in Uptown were named to honor the people. When you get out in the countryside, I have no idea if the streets were named to honor the people, or like so many things like Sharon Amity, it was just, they named it because that's the way you got to this very large farm or plantation that was owned by the Johnsons or the Johnstons. I just have no idea there, but I kind of, and I don't know if I'm just rationalizing it, but to me, it's like, it seems like we might be, particularly with the ones out in the countryside where it may have been a geographic thing as opposed to an honoring thing, that we might be going a little bit too far. Uptown, I'm still thinking about, but, and I know B last time made the comment, and I agree with her, that just because it was, that way once doesn't mean it can't be changed. I totally agree with that, but that's just my thoughts. I'm not, not quite there totally, but right now, I don't know what else to do.
Thank you, Lynn. I mean, to me, this is by far the toughest. Enslavement is a morally abhorrent without question. So grappling with this part is the toughest by far. Any other comments?
Hi, sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the notes. This is Tiffany. There's a comment from Mary, just a clarification about the street names that were included. I have Mosby Lane, and then she said Jackson Street and Elizabeth.
It is, there's a Jackson Avenue, there's a Mosby Lane, a Dressler, I'm not sure if it's a street or lane, I'll look that up. Court, Barringer Drive, and Pfeiffer, whatever Pfeiffer is, Pfeiffer.
I believe Avenue. I have
Avenue.
Okay.
And it should have been Jackson Avenue, not Jackson
Street. Avenue. Got it. Okay.
So we've added Jackson Avenue, Mosby Lane, Dressler Court, Barringer Drive, and Pfeiffer Avenue.
Okay, I'm going to show the list one more time just to make sure that I have it correct.
I can't see it, Tiffany. I mean, Mosby Lane, Jackson Avenue, Dressler Court, Barringer Drive. Yep, those are the ones I have. Those are reflective?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that robust discussion. Now moving on, we have looking to the future, the criteria for naming streets in the future, and you had done work on this in pairs, and Tiffany and I tried to glean from all the pair conversations the following synthesis across all the pairs. And do these criteria that we listed accurately reflect the feedback? Is there anything missing? Anything need to be added or changed? I hope everyone's had an opportunity to look at those. Tiffany, can you pull up that page? Okay. Any comments, or do these accurately capture what we want to recommend going forward? Tiffany, I can't see the with the name with it up there. Oops. Can you take it down for just a second? Mary, this is so awkward. Mary, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. I have no question, no problem with the criteria that you listed. I just want to note that given what we heard from CDOT, we can't name things. I mean, it's going to be hard to name things for people. And unless they have a very distinctive last name. And I wonder if we should somehow incorporate a recommendation that that the city rethink its street naming policies to allow for the naming of historically significant figures.
It's a great point.
This is Kathy. It's not that you can't name a street for somebody, you just can't use the first and last name. So
but my worry is there may be somebody with a very common last name that I'm blanking on who it might be, but Smith Street or King Street. You couldn't tell, and there may already be another King. There's Martin Luther King Boulevard. So how do so you can't duplicate. Anyway, I just wonder if we should suggest that they loosen it up a little bit.
I mean, you can always make that recommendation.
Yeah. I mean, and the part about the stealing of the signs was very eye-opening fact. So.
I mean, we had over off Central where Eastland Mall used to be, and this was interesting because Federico, I worked with him on it, but there was a street named Los Amigos, and we allowed that street name change, and that sign was stolen 4 times in 2 weeks. I was like, why? That's not even a person's name, but I guess somebody was just enamored with that and they kept taking the signs. But I mean, people can steal a street sign whether there's a name on it or not. I mean, if it has some kind of meaning to them, they'll take it. I don't know that I would, well, not that my opinion matters, but I don't know that I would use that as a reason not to do something.
Yeah.
Mary, do you think we should include that kind of would you like to craft or propose a statement that we would add that when the city considers naming a street for a historically significant individual, the commission recommends using the following criteria, and add a bullet point?
I'll be glad to try to craft something. I'm not entirely sure what you just suggested, but I'll send you something that that I hope will help the city find its way amid the many conflicting issues they have to deal with.
Other comments about these criteria? I mean, this is obviously just totally advisory, but this, that they asked for our opinion, so we're rendering it, I guess, is the best way I can. What they do with it will be their decision. if there are no other I'm sorry.
Emily, we didn't mention anything about age limits or whether or not, to name something for, if we're naming for an individual, they should be at least 75 or older, or because we'll be opening ourselves up to people who are younger and whose legacy may change significantly.
Okay. Excellent point. That wasn't in every group, but there were those that said that. Should we add that point? I mean, I think one group said it shouldn't be for anyone who's living, but, and then one group said it should only be for of a certain age. So,
I think it's a good idea not to do it for a living person, unless, I mean, when we talked about it, Fanny and I, was like, there are probably people in town who someday you might think about naming a street after, and they may still be alive, maybe in their 80s, and their legacy, has already been built. And do you need to wait till they're gone before you honor them? I don't know. I think younger people, it becomes really, a concern. I mean, that you might name people who, to me, get benefit from that when they go to run for public office or something. It's, I don't know. I've never liked naming things after living people, but I think maybe the over 75 would be okay. Or either way, no one living.
Tom? Yeah, thank you.
I vote strongly in favor of no one living. And in fact, many communities say that the person has to have passed away at least X number of years ago, 5 years or something like that. There's an outpouring of emotion that we feel towards living people, and that's a good thing. And towards those who have recently passed away, that's a good thing. But the street name is technically forever. And we want to give some space for history to judge, as we say.
Yep.
I would like to chime in.
Mecklenburg County, I believe CMS has a 5-year rule on theirs.
Okay. B, thank you, Tom. B, what did you have a comment?
I wanted to chime in on what Lynn, Tom, and Annie, what we're all saying here. I think it takes a while to develop a legacy. And when you are younger, you have not developed what your life is contributing to your community for us to say it. You may have had a streak like a meteor and done some great things in your 20s or 30s. And we've seen people here in Charlotte who have done that, who were the first in doing something or whatever, made a difference. But then their life went south. So I think we have to wait and let someone's legacy be built before you name it for them and see what impact they had on the region. I know you want to give people their flowers before they die, but in this case, I think we have to wait until we determine if your garden was worth remembering. I don't think you should do it when someone is too young. There should be some parameters around that before we say, oh, this is or we'll find ourselves in this situation again, where somebody was good, then bad, then we're like, oh, for heaven's sakes, we already named the street for them. So I think legacy is very important, and you need to be able to establish something before you get a street named for you. That's it.
Great. Thanks, B. So I have the sense that we want to say that when the city considers naming a street for a historically significant individual who is no longer living. And Tom, if you could help me craft that language of how that would be terrific. But do people agree that it should not be for a living person, that we are recommending someone, a significant who leaving a legacy after some period of time? Are people, first of all, not living people first? Okay. Not living. And then do we want to do the 5-year wait period? Or just say no longer living? I see a big thumbs down, or just say, I see thumbs up.
Just for five years? Yep.
Yeah, there was one person who doesn't feel that way, and then some aren't voting. So I can't, there's not unanimity on the part about the number of years. There's some people that I can't see thumbs for.
I would say a thumbs down, and so one of the people I had on my list was dot counts. And I feel like one thing that we should be considering is, going forward is one thing if we're making a rule that someone has to no longer be living. But some of these street names, if we do rename them, will be streets of prominence versus some, smaller side streets or new developments going forward. So I think it's just something to consider is that, we may be missing an opportunity to take some of these more prominent street names and give them to people who we think deserve to be named in honor of them that, may still be alive. So I don't know if it's a consideration versus like going forward, what we recommend the changes be. Sorry for the background noise, we're teething today. And the streets we're renaming that are current.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kristen. Well, I think there was unanimity of the larger group not to include living people. I'm not sure there's a consensus on the length of time. So Tom, craft something and we'll revisit it next week if you'll, that introduction. And Mary,
also, sorry, age. You need clarification on the age.
Well, no, that was if the person were living.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It would only be, I think there's a consensus that we are proposing only historically significant individuals who are no longer living.
No longer living, gotcha. Okay.
And then Mary, if you want to craft something about inclusion of the name, and we'll try, if you could get us, both of you, if you could get that to us, by end of day tomorrow, that would be great, and send it to Tiffany and me. But in general, I believe we reached a consensus that these criteria we agree with. One last time, the criteria reflect the partner assignments. One last time. B, are you in? I can't see I can't see yours. B, are you in? I just can't.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right. Moving along. Then if by end of week, if in the next 2 days, if you have an individual that meets these criteria that are no longer living that you would like to propose, would you please send them to Tiffany, me, with a paragraph, just rationale or a few sentences that we need to begin to compile that list. We will certainly be asking the community for a list as well. And all of this are really just by way, that we are creating sort of an inventory of citizens or people that we deem worthy. But of course, it's going to be the process that was outlined for us. We're not really deciding, but we are trying to suggest people that meet the criteria that we think would better reflect our values today and people we would like to honor and celebrate. So please begin that process and pass it along. Now moving to the final 3 recommendations. These are the more general recommendations that have emerged as we have had these conversations over the last couple of months. And there has been a lot of discussion about the importance of the history that we have learned about the lost cause and from Dr. Cox, and then also Charlotte's ties to slavery, to the Confederacy, and to white supremacy. So much of that history that we didn't know, that we thought it should be more broadly disseminated. So these 3 recommendations were put in to address some of that and to really begin to change our symbolic and commemorative landscape. So let's look at number 6 first. Tiffany, can you put those up? So the first is really about the city somehow disseminating this information about this history and educating the public more broadly, because clearly the history that is in the ground here shapes so many of the major challenges our community faces. All kinds of racial disparities and lack of economic mobility, and people need to understand that these forces really help drive who we are today. These are three. There was discussion about presenting this history to elected officials and staff of city, county, CMS, providing educational materials to CMS and other schools, and then having some sort of online presence so that anyone who was interested in this history could access it. Will you take it down for a second, Tiffany? So do these recommendations reflect our earlier discussions? Do the commission members support them? There anything missing, any changes, additions? I see thumbs up. Any comments or? I see all thumbs up. So if there's no discussion, we'll just move along from there. And then the next one we sort of touched on when Dr. Cox was talking about other cities, and it's sort of interesting that in many ways Charlotte doesn't really have much of a commemorative landscape. I mean, part of it is we're always building and tearing down. But, you know, that if we want to remove from the public square the monuments that reflect value, that are symbols of values that we no longer support and that are abhorrent, what are we doing to celebrate those values that we do support? Or what are monuments that can shed lights on chapters of history that are too little known, or that we need to grapple with, or that we need to confront? So these suggestions were created in that vein. I really welcome everyone's thoughts, feedback about those. Do we support this recommendation and creation of new commemorative spaces? Are there others that we would propose?
Emily, this is B. What I would say is I like that, other commemorative spaces, because there may be people who were important, but we don't name a street for them. It may be that they were community activists in their neighborhood or community, and there may be a public park space, some of the neighborhood parks. If there was a community activist, right now I'm thinking about Judy Williams, who just died and who was a murdered offspring, and what she did overall in the city, but what she did in helping her communities along West Boulevard. And that may not be the best example, but it's something that just occurred to me. But there are people who have been so proactive in their communities, but may not come to the level of naming a street, but they need to be acknowledged. And that means we're acknowledging how our has changed in these years since putting up memorials to Confederates that did not represent the entire community and all of the people of the community. So maybe that is one way. I like the recommendation about commemorative spaces as such. My only concern would be, will someone come back and say, well, the Confederate States of America, why can't we if you're going to put this lady in that space, why can't we put one there? And then we get back to the memorializing question. So that may be one that we have to grapple with as well. But I like the commemorative space part, but going forward instead of going back. That's it.
Well, and thank you, B. I mean, I know Dr. Cox in our presentation, one of the main points about the Confederate monuments is it was a very narrow slice of the population who made those decisions. I mean, African Americans had no voice in selecting those particular monuments. So, you know, I mean that there are there are many people in our history, you know, who didn't have a voice, and that, as you said, I mean, there are many people that we could honor for what they contributed to the city. Other comments or thoughts or?
I was just had a question. I didn't trying to understand number 3. Install the lynching memorial from the national. What does that mean exactly?
Willie, do you, Dr. Griffin, do you want to comment on that? Because there is an initiative that's going right now to do that.
Yes, I guess it's been in the works about 2 years now. It's the Charlotte Mecklenburg Remembrance Project. This is a part of a larger national call that was initiated by the Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson down in Montgomery, with the opening of the National Memorial for Lynching. He has challenged counties across the country to recognize their lynching victims. I think they have documented over 2,000 and possibly more lynching victims that happened within, I believe, from 1865 up until the turn of the 20th century. Charlotte, as you may or may not know, had 2 documented lynchings. There may have been more, but 2 documented lynchings that are listed in the museum and by EJI. And so about 2 years ago, concerned community members first started with teachers from CMS. They took a bus trip. I think about 25 teachers went down to the unveiling of the museum, and they began organizing, trying to draft curriculum to teach this in the school system. And later, the Levine Museum, along with some local, I think Bank of America sponsored a bus that had city officials, business leaders, more educators, and some other institutes, some other organizations, and they have since started the Charlotte Mecklenburg Remembrance Project, and we're working with EJI to make sure that we cover all of the criteria that they have in place for starting community outreach and getting getting multiple. It needs to be a wide swath of people from across throughout the community that are involved, and we need to show that we are providing some kind of efforts to reach the communities that have been affected by this history most. And so now we're in the process of collecting soil. We're doing ceremonies to collect soil. The lynchings that happened was the 1913 lynching at Good Samaritan Hospital, which is at the site of Bank of America Stadium, and then the 1929 lynching of Willie McDaniel out near the Central Piedmont Community College out on W.T. Harris. I'm forgetting the name of the area, but we're trying to hold ceremonies now, talking with the organizations and how to get involved. And so we have to do that before EJI releases. You've probably seen images of these steel corrugated coffins that look rusted. Once these counties have proven that they are committed to telling this history and spreading it across the community, then they will release that coffin that has the names of the 2 lynching victims etched in the side. And then the city has to decide how they want to best memorialize that. And it will probably be in some kind of monument or space in the city. So,
okay. Well, that's a good idea, and I also like the next one too about the wall.
Well, I think, yeah. Thank you for filling us in. I think that we can change the wording of that to make it clear to connect and support with the efforts of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Remembrance Project to memorialize, et cetera, et cetera. That because yeah, I mean, so that it's clear what's actually being recommended. Other comments about these, or are there any additional ones that come to mind? I mean, this is not all inclusive. These were ones that obviously we're proposing up above with the contextualization at Elmwood, but it is a piece of this as well. If there are no further comments, do the commission members agree with these? Thumbs up or thumbs down or maybe? Okay. Okay. And then the last one, it was interesting. Thank you. Thank you. It was interesting as Tiffany and I were working on putting all this together, that it was in the national news that the Mellon Foundation, which is the largest foundation supporting the humanities in the country, has launched the Monuments Project. And it's going to award $250 million over the next 5 years to look at the commemorative landscape across the country and reimagine it. And it will support efforts to create new commemorative spaces, to contextualize monuments and memorials, and to move them or remove them. So, you know, it just seemed logical that why not have Charlotte apply and use those funds to support this work? Because so often there are recommendations and there's no funding source. And here is a prime, you know, pool of funds to really help the, you know, help the city think creatively and differently. And you know, it could incorporate this and also other work. I mean, I can imagine thinking about using this funding in conjunction with public art, or there are lots of ways to envision what might be possible. But do we want to recommend this to the city as part of our commission report? I mean, it's certainly going to be their choice whether the city applies or not, but all those who think that we should recommend to the city. I think, Mary, you're not, I can't see, and I'm not, there's some folks who've turned off their screens.
My thumb is up.
Okay, thank you.
I can't see it.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, well, we've got about 2 minutes to 1. Thank you. I'm sorry that WebEx makes this so awkward to do. I would ask everyone now to just, we've looked at all the specific 8 recommendations. Stepping back, is this, is the draft report sort of an appropriate scaffolding for those recommendations? I just want to sort of get, you know, general response to that framework as it is continued to be refined between now and next week. Anyone? I'm here. I think I'm seeing some head nods, but let's just do a quick, maybe it's a kind of a checkout. Just how you're feeling about the recommendations, and is this the right direction as we finalize for next week? Let's see. Tom, you were, I can see you first. I'm just going to do it by my going across the bottom.
I'm very pleased with where we are. what we have, I think, is something that looks doable. I think the research that Dr. Cox and Dr. Griffin have done with help from Len Norman and others it gives a solid explanation to people why we're doing this. I think that we see this as a fairly short list of possible changes. It's going to take a lot of people by surprise, and so I think it's what they ask us to do, and I think we've done a good job.
Yeah, thank you. Fanny, you're next on my screen. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Tom. I think this is a good kind of framework for what we're doing. I think that a lot of the information that we have is going to be good information to share with other people. I'm particularly interested in how we're going to use, or how the city or the community will use the information, the historical information that we have acquired. But I think that this is a good step forward.
Great, thank you. Let's see who's next on my little screen. Kristen.
Yeah, I think everything's coming together really nicely. I'll just be interested to see as we start talking about names, if we end up having more people that we think deserve honors than we have street names, because I think it'll be really interesting to hear what who everyone's recommending.
Okay, great, thank you. Deborah?
I think we have a great framework that I can stand behind. We had some great background information, and I'm looking forward to presenting it. And if you need any help in editing in any way, just let me know.
Thank you. I appreciate that offer. B?
Well, I think we've done what we set out to do. We have hammered it down to the basics of what we need to pass along. And I think there's a lot of clarity in what we're saying to council. I like the idea of Carnegie Mellon, those public spaces that could honor folks who don't get a street name. That may be where those dollars could be used. This hasn't been easy. As I sit here looking at the fact that more than likely the street that my family has lived on for 50 years is going to change the name, but knowing the background history makes it easier to accept that type of change. I do hope that the city, when you have new elected leaders, this should be part of their city government 101 class, and that they pass this along, that anybody who's running for office here, you ought to know the background. I appreciate you moving here. I appreciate you want to be involved, but baby, know the history before you start talking about the future.
Thank you, B. Levester, are you able to unmute?
I'm going to try. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Great.
Okay. I would like to say I apologize for these technical difficulties. That's what you do when you buy Hewlett Packard products, I guess. But anyway, I'm in concurrence. I'm in concurrence with what everybody has been talking about today. I've been monitoring it, and it looks like we are on a good start. On a side note, I was reading that the Morrison Library has now changed their name to the South Park Library, and they're changing some of the memorabilia that they have and things on the inside. And I was looking at the Charlotte Observer last evening, and one gentleman made a comment, said, well, you changing the names of the Morrison Library, doing things of that nature. Why aren't you changing the building for Bob Walton because of his improprieties? So I kind of liked about that. And I said, well, that's kind of what we're doing. But I think we're gonna get some pushback. But I think that in the manner that we're doing it, and the fact that we're going to educate people on why we're doing it, I think you, Madam Chair, and all the committee members have done an outstanding job.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks for your participation. Thank you. Mary?
I concur with what everybody has said. The research has been very enlightening. The process has been great. Thank you, Tiffany and Emily, for the process. I do think there's going to be some pushback, but I think the City Council will handle that. Will handle that well, I hope. And I think having the research to back up the recommendations will really help.
Thank you. Mike? Mike, can you unmute?
I can, thank you. Yeah, I think what we're moving forward with meets our charge, which is very important. I think we've had a serious discussion. I think we all appreciate the importance of what we're doing and the implications it has for our community. And I like the fact that we have looked at some of the pushback, if you will, we might get and make sure that any recommendations we're making have justification for them. And I'm looking forward to our next meeting, which I assume will come forward with our suggestions, maybe send those before the meeting and go through with the final part, which is the proposals for renamings.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. Lynn, I believe you're I think you're the last commission member.
Okay. Well, then I don't have much to add. Everybody, I think, has said everything. Like Mr. Flowers said, I saw that article about the Morrison Library, and I thought, gosh, my worry had been that this list is long, does look short, but as Tom said, it looks long to people who'll be shocked to see all this. But my concern was, I was concerned the Morrison family would really fight Morrison Boulevard, but they didn't fight the library. They gave the money, and they were in agreement that, well, time for a change. So, at least that's been opened. And I think that there'll be a lot of people who, once we present our reasoning and show that it's all based on, it's like, say, COVID, science, or in this case, historic research, I think we're in good shape. So thank you for everything you've done, and Tiffany and everyone else in the city.
Yeah. Thank you all. This is, I appreciate all the time and effort and discussion that everyone has put into this. WebEx doesn't make it easy. I so wish this could have been in person. Again, your assignment, Mary, you have some language. Tom, you have some language. Everyone, I hope, will come up with names of individuals that they think are worthy of a street being named for, with a rationale. If you could send that to Tiffany and me by the end of the week, that would be terrific. I also will, as we work on this, Deborah, thank you so much for your offer. There's so many great wordsmiths on this commission. I may be sending a draft out for just your editorial eyes out there. There's so many great readers that we need to polish this. We move very quickly to get it on paper, and now we've got to refine it. So we will resume next week, and our hope will be to get you something beforehand that you can review, but that's our goal. But we've got some pieces to put together, and Dr. Cox and Dr. Griffin have some pieces they will be inserting that fill out that historical context. So I apologize. This is the first meeting we've run over, but this was the heart of the deliberations. So thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.